Chapter 16 sticky notes. So this video is going to cover Chapter 16, mainly 16.3 and 16.4 and 16.5. However, you do need to know the case study here for Chapter 16. So let's turn the page and take a look at the case study, which is about the collapse of the cod fishery. And that will be covered also later in the chapter. But from this case study, as you read it, make sure you know that the cod collapse was off the coast of New England and Nova Scotia. And you can see a map over here. You have New England, you have Maine, Massachusetts, and they fished mainly the Gorges Bank or the Georges Bank. And up here in Canada, this is Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. And this was another cod fishing ground. So those two cod fishing grounds were extremely famous. It helped create the wealth of the United States way back when it was a colony. Helped fund the revolution because of the wealth of cod. But then with new technology, the population of cod crashed. So make sure you know that, and it still has not rebounded. Loss of money, loss of jobs, all of that good stuff, or not so good stuff. Okay, so we've already covered this material in Unit 4, and so I'm going to skip past to page 428. So you do need to understand ocean acidification, and we'll go over ocean acidification a couple of different times, first with this chapter, and then also as we study Unit 9, global climate change. But you need to understand the reactions of what happens. So CO2 is released from burning fossil fuels and more decomposition, etc. It dissolves into water, where it combines with water in the ocean to create carbonic acid. And the carbonic acid, there's a couple of things that happen. And so let's take a look at my sticky notes that have been slightly altered, and I'll tell you why. Well, we talked about CO2 from burning fossil fuels dissolves in the ocean water and reacts to make carbonic acid, which lowers the pH of ocean water. Now, it's not like ocean water is maybe around an 8 pH on average, so it lowers to maybe like a 7.6. So it isn't this huge jump, but it's enough of a jump to cause serious problems. So what happens is that shells that are made of calcium carbonate, including corals, but also including clams and other things like scallops, they cannot form new shells and skeletons. So when I say they begin to dissolve, well, this is kind of a gray area. For the AP test, you want to know that they can't form new shells, so their shells weakened because of the lack of calcium carbonate in the water to form the shells. And you can see some of that in the figures. Now, beginning to dissolve, this is actually part of the new research. So when I say this is a gray area, to be on the safe side, don't write this on an FRQ. Say that without the calcium carbonate, the corals can't make new shells, can't grow, and so their shells get thinner as, let's say, a clam grows in size. It can't make shell material, so the shells get thinner because they can't make new shell material. New research is coming in that this is actually happening, the beginning to dissolve the actual shells, but to be on the safe side, write this part here in pencil. Okay, going on then to the next pages, we covered these aquatic ecosystems way back in Unit 1. We did some graphic organizers where we covered estuaries and wetlands, so you don't need to sticky note that. But now here you need to start sticky noting. Well, you need to just sticky note the case study about cod and ocean acidification, and now you need to sticky note, starting here, 16.3, which is marine pollution. So one of the biggest parts of trash in the ocean is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And that's a big patch of garbage that the currents, the gyres in the ocean have created this huge patch about the size of Texas. in the Pacific Ocean. They're also in all of the oceans, but the biggest one, because the biggest ocean, is in the Pacific. Some other problems with trash, you can see here, there's some pictures to know. Wildlife gets tangled in it. They eat it. Here's a bird, I don't know if I think it's an albatross that has eaten plastic and other kinds of trash. And it also, the plastic can degrade into tiny pieces, and then animals mistake it for plankton and eat that instead of plankton. So it fills them up and they think they're not hungry, but they have no nutrition. They can't digest it. And then the chemicals leach out of the plastic into the bodies, and they can be loaded up with toxins as well. So here's the problems: intestinal blockages, choking hazards, and then the toxins that leach out. And we'll learn more about these specific toxins that leach out of plastics and other materials in Unit 8, which is our Chapter 14. And so an example of this is microplastics. All right. So on the next page, this Science Behind the Story talks about the Great Pacific Garbage Patches, and you can see different areas here where the plastic concentrates. Nothing to sticky note here. All right, the next type of pollution for this section is our oil spills. So you need to know a couple of things. First of all, you need to know in the graph that we do have natural seeps of oil. Think of Carpinteria Beach, where there's natural seeps. So people get tar on their feet from natural seeps that kind of come out of the rocks. Well, it happens out in the ocean, it happens on land and seeps into the ocean. So the number one source of oil in the ocean is actual natural seeps. And then it's little spills, like somebody's water ski boat spills a little oil. So little non-point source pollution. And then you have tanker spills. So a big oil tanker, like you can see here, that happened several times. The largest one was the Exxon Valdez. Actually, that's not true. Exxon Valdez was not the largest, but it's the most famous up in Alaska. So what happens when you have an oil spill is it coats the fur and feathers, and like birds can't fly when their feathers are coated with oil. The oil eventually can clump together, and instead of floating, it gets enough mass that it can actually sink to the bottom and kill the benthic organisms. Remember, benthic means bottom of the ocean or bottom of a lake. And then you're going to have a decrease in tourism money. You're going to have a decrease in fishing money. So these are our economic impacts of an oil spill. Now, there are several ways to clean up an oil spill. And so you have booms, which corral the oil to be sucked up by skimmer boats. So a boom is, take a look at this picture right here, these kind of U-shaped things that are coming out of this boat. This is a skimmer boat. And these booms float, and they take the oil and they sort of move it into this big circle, and then it has a suction here called a skimmer, and it will suck up the oil from the top. We also have some genetically modified bacteria that can digest oil. There are chemical dispersants that can break up the oil into tiny pieces and let it float away. That doesn't get rid of the oil, so now you still have oil in the ocean with toxins, and you have chemical dispersants with toxins. So we don't know the long-term impact to plankton of our chemical dispersants either. There hasn't been long-term studies for that. The next type of pollution would be our nutrient pollution. So excess fertilizer carrying nitrogen and phosphates can cause harmful algal blooms. Now, we know that it can cause eutrophication, but it can also cause we call it a red tide. So basically, this phytoplankton is red in color, but you don't see it because they're microscopic. But when they get so much in a mass from a bloom, they can turn the water red, and they actually produce a toxin. And so when this kind of thing happens, they close the beaches and say, don't eat shellfish, don't eat anything that eats plankton from here, because it's going to build up toxins in the bodies and can hurt you. One of our problems off the coast of California is when there's a certain bloom of a certain phytoplankton called a dinoflagellate. a certain species of dinoflagellate that produces something called domoic acid. And some of our marine mammals, like our seals and sea lions, they can have domoic acid poisoning, which eats away at their brains and causes seizures, and it's very sad. Okay, next section, 16.4, emptying the ocean. All right, so this is really about overfishing, and you can see the chart here. Our consumption and catch of fish in the ocean has steadily risen. And so overfishing is really the extreme scarcity of some species like cod, and there's others as well. When a certain species is overfished, it lowers the overall biodiversity, and species that depend on it for food to eat or to eat it can knock your food web out of balance. And then when there's a crash, like the cod industry, it can harm people economically who depend on fishing either for food or for money. Now, there's some big fears in some countries, especially in Asia, that rely on fish as their main protein, that as the world's oceans are emptying, how is 1 billion people in China going to get protein in their diets? It's not as easy as just starting all of land-based protein like meats. Do they have the resources for that? Do they have the land for that? And then what about the climate change impacts of that? So it's a very complicated situation. So we have some fishing technology that has allowed overfishing to occur since the 1950s. Sonar can locate big schools of fish, and then satellite imagery, thermal sensing systems. So these are all technology on the boats to help them locate big pockets of fish so they know where to put their nets. First, you get higher catches, and then you have population catches. This is why in the United States we have strict quotas for fishing. If you ever watch the show The Deadliest Catch, you will see they have strict quotas, and sometimes those quotas lower in a year when the population has declined of crab or another species. Then some other methods, you have drift netting, which is this picture up here at the top. You have long line here, that's how they catch things like swordfish, but they also catch sharks and dolphins. And then bottom trawling is the worst. They scrape along the bottom to get things like halibut, fish that live on the bottom. But you're also going to catch all kinds of, shrimp too. This is mainly how they do shrimp. But the problem is you're scraping the whole benthic community, and so you're going to disturb sea stars, brittle stars, other species that you can't sell. Either you don't have a license or a quota, or it's just no market for things. So you're going to kill a lot of things. They say that bottom trawling for shrimp produces something like 90% bycatch, stuff that you can't sell and you have to throw back into the ocean. And a lot of times when you throw stuff back into the ocean, they don't survive. They've been so traumatized and injured. Okay, so you can see some effects of bottom trawling. So there's a bottom fish of some kind. It could be a halibut or some other sort of benthic fish that it swims on the bottom. A bottom trawler comes along. You can see also that there's urchins, and there's, I don't know what these are, but these are other living things. And then after a bottom trawler, look what happens. It completely destroys the benthic community. And then you can see you have dolphin populations that have been caught by the thousands because of bycatch. Things like longline tuna catch dolphins instead. And so sometimes you will see now on tuna cans dolphin-safe tuna, which means they captured the tuna without harming dolphins, and those are a good thing to buy. All right, you can see here some more graphs. Know this graph on cod decline. It's the most famous case study of overfishing. And then how can we help? What's a personal decision that we can make? We can make sustainable seafood choices. There's actually a really good website from the Monterey Bay Aquarium called Seafood Watch. You can Google it, Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. And they update it every year to show what are the sustainable seafood sources where people don't do these harmful ecological practices. And so these are, according to when book was printed about 10 years ago, these are the most sustainable choices for fish to buy. You can see some of them say farmed, so that's aquaculture, which we learned about in chapter 10. So aquaculture has some problems. It has pros and cons, but if the things like pollution and diseases are managed, it's a good way, aquaculture, which is farmed, to not overfish in the ocean. And then these are things that are really overfished tremendously. The problem is that most of our oceans are international waters. So you can't regulate, you can have international treaties, but a country can't make laws and quotas for international waters. And it's something like 100 miles from your coast is considered your country's waters, and then beyond that is international. Okay, so 16.5 is marine conservation. And we have here a term, the maximum sustainable yield. It's the number of fish that can be caught and still leave enough to reproduce for the next year's catch. And this term we can also use in forestry. How many trees can we cut down to still leave an intact forest? And trees can grow back in a couple of decades. Well, they do this also with fish and quotas. So the places we can legally manage, we do in our country's waters, and many countries do this, but not all. And so we do this through quotas, licenses, size limits. You have to throw back females, etc. And then know these terms: a marine protective area and a marine reserve. So these are areas that are no-touch zones, so fishermen can't go in them. And what it actually does is it actually increases the number of fish outside the reserve, because in your protected areas, you have fish that can actually grow and live and make babies, and this actually helps the fishing industry when they have some protected areas. And here are the benefits on the next page. So note that fishermen originally were opposed, where they used to be able to fish. Sometimes they were told, you can't fish here anymore. And then they found out the results were actually better, and they made more money when there was certain reserves set aside. Okay, and you can see they did some research on, is a small reserve a big enough, or medium, or a large reserve? Because the problem with the large reserve is that the fish stay in it, and then the boats can't catch them. But maybe a medium reserve's better, because you can still breed, and some will go out here for boats to catch and make money. All right, that's it for chapter 16.